I'm going to show you a Hebrew word that most Christians in the world have never heard, but which is hidden inside one of the most famous verses of the New Testament. That word completely changes what Jesus said when he spoke of the narrow gate. And by the end of the video, you'll understand why 2,000 years of preaching have been built on a mistranslation, a medieval legend, and a geometric image that was never what Jesus meant. We're going to break 3 lies today. The first has to do with a camel, the second with an archaeological gate that never existed, and the third with the most misunderstood word in Matthew 7. And when you finish watching this, you're going to read that chapter with new eyes, forever. If you genuinely care about what the Bible says in its original language, hit the like button on the video right now. That helps the channel enormously to reach more people who need to hear this. Let's start with the biggest lie, the one someone has probably already told you. The story goes like this. In ancient Jerusalem, there was a tiny gate in the wall, so low, so narrow, that no loaded camel could fit through it. To enter, the animal had to be completely unloaded, then kneel down, then advance step by step. That gate, the legend says, was called the Eye of the Needle. And so, when Jesus said in Matthew 19 that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom, he wasn't talking about a literal needle. He was talking about that little gate. And the same legend says the narrow entrance of Matthew 7 would be the very same thing. It's a moving story. It's the favorite of many preachers. But it is completely false. In 2022, a researcher named Agnieszka Ziminska published a study in the academic journal New Testament Studies, edited by Cambridge University. The article's title was exactly this: The Origin of the Myth of the Eye of the Needle Gate. Ziminska traced documentarily, manuscript by manuscript, where the legend had been born. And the results were devastating. For decades, it was taught that the idea came from Theophylact of Ohrid, a Byzantine theologian of the 11th century. Popular evangelical handbooks repeated it. But when Ziminska reviewed Theophylact's Greek texts directly, she discovered that he never spoke of an architectural gate. He only mentioned a different linguistic hypothesis, nothing more. So where did the gate come from? The first documented mention appears in a medieval gloss attributed to Anselm of Canterbury around the 12th century. Not in Jerusalem, not in archaeology, in a marginal note of a European manuscript. Then that note was copied by Hugh of Saint-Cher in the 13th century, repeated in the Catena Aurea of Thomas Aquinas, and centuries later, some medieval pilgrims began saying they had seen the gate, like religious tourism, without real historical value. And here is what is almost never mentioned in the pulpits. When modern archaeologists excavated Jerusalem looking for first-century gates, they found nothing resembling the Eye of the Needle. When historians read Flavius Josephus, the first-century Jewish writer who describes the walls of Jerusalem in obsessive detail in his work The Jewish War, they found no mention. And when the rabbis compiled the Mishnah in the 2nd century, they listed the 5 gates of the Temple Mount and the 7 gates of the courts, and none was called by that name. The gate did not exist, and that means something enormous. It means that the entire interpretation of the narrow entrance that was built on top of that legend also collapses with it, which, believe me, is good news. Because what Jesus actually said is infinitely deeper than an architectural metaphor. And to understand it, you have to go back to something almost no one does. You have to listen to the original word, one word, 5 letters in Greek, 3 consonants in Hebrew. And there everything changes. The Greek word is this, stenos. It means narrow, tight, reduced. From it comes the medical term you may know, stenosis, which describes the narrowing of an artery. If Jesus had simply wanted to say narrow entrance, that word would have been enough and the matter would have been settled. But he did something more. When Matthew, in the first century, translated into Greek what Jesus said in Aramaic, he didn't stop with stenos. In verse 14 of chapter 7, he added a second word, a rare word, a word that appears only 3 times in the entire New Testament. A word that goes with the road, not the gate. The word is thlibo. It is a participle, passive voice, perfect tense, and that, grammatically, already changes the meaning entirely, because thlibo does not mean narrow in a geometric sense. It literally means that has been pressed, that has been squeezed by something or by someone. Completed action, persistent effect. The road, says Matthew, is not just narrow. It is something that has been oppressed, compressed, crushed. And from what verb does that word come? It comes from thlibo. And here the comfortable reading breaks, because thlibo in the Greek of the first century is not a neutral word. It is the same word that Paul uses in Romans 5 when he says that tribulation produces patience. The same one in 2 Corinthians 4 when he says, we are afflicted in everything but not crushed. The same one that appears in Acts 14 when the apostles teach that it is necessary to enter the kingdom of God through many tribulations. Tribulation, that is the sister word. In Greek, thlipsis, same root. Connect the dots. The narrow road of Matthew 7:14 is not geographically narrow. It is a road that squeezes, where one is pressed, where one suffers, literally, tribulation. This is not free interpretation. It is in the standard academic dictionary of New Testament Greek, known as Didache. It was defended by A.J. Mattil Jr. in an article in the Journal of Biblical Literature in 1979, titled The Way of Tribulation. It is upheld by the most recognized technical commentaries of the last century, Davies and Allison in the International Critical Commentary, Robert France in the Eerdmans Evangelical Commentary, Ulrich Luss in the German Hermeneia Commentary, Donald Hagner, Craig Keener, they all agree. The road of life is a road that presses, a road that oppresses. And most Christians read that verse and think only, well, you have to make a bit of an effort, a bit. But the word Matthew chose does not say a bit. It says tribulation, it says press, it says oppression. If this blew your mind, share with someone who loves to read the Bible seriously. Because we're only on the first layer, and 2 more remain. Here enters the moment the title of the video promised you, the Hebrew meaning. Because Jesus did not speak Greek with his disciples, he spoke Aramaic. And Aramaic is practically Hebrew, and when he spoke of a road that presses, there was a concrete Hebrew word behind it, a word that carried 1,000 years of biblical history. The word is tsar, 3 consonants, tsadi, resh, resh. The most respected Hebrew dictionary in academia, known as Brown Driver Briggs, defines tsar in 3 ways. As an adjective, narrow, tight. As a noun, anguish, affliction, tribulation. And a third meaning, adversary, enemy, someone who presses. The 3 definitions come from the same root idea, compression, something that closes around you, something that reduces your space, something that crushes you. And tsar has a sister word, zara. Same root, feminine form. It appears more than 70 times in the Hebrew Bible, and according to the concordance, in 44 of those times it is translated as trouble, 8 as affliction, 7 as anguish, 5 as adversity, 5 as agony, 3 as tribulation, zara, pressure, tightness, suffering. Where does this word appear? Everywhere. When King David flees from Saul and hides in caves, he says, "In my tsar, I cried out to the Lord." When the prophet Jeremiah sees Jerusalem fall, he weeps with Zara. When the Psalms speak of dark days, those where the soul feels the walls of the world closing in, the word that repeats is Zar, narrow, tight, tribulation. Now go back to Matthew 7:14. If Jesus, speaking in Aramaic, said something like a way that is tsar, then when Matthew translated it into Greek with thlibo, he wasn't adding an extra word. He was trying to preserve exactly that Hebrew root, the root of anguish, the root of siege, the root of one who is pressed. And here comes a fact that few linguists mention, but which is in the concordance of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament made 200 years before Christ. When the Jewish translators of Alexandria translated tsar and tsara into Greek, what words did they choose? You guessed it. One of the main ones was thlipsis. Another was stenos and thlipsis, the same two words that Matthew uses in chapter 7. It is no coincidence. Matthew is pointing deliberately to the root of tsar. He is saying, this path Jesus speaks of is the path of tsara, the one of biblical anguish, the one who feels pressed, and that is almost never taught in the churches. But stay, because now comes what destroys every comfortable reading of the verse. What follows changes the whole meaning, because tsar has an opposite in Hebrew, an antonym word, which appears in the same text where tsar appears almost always right after. It is merhav, or its verbal form rachav. It means breadth, wideness, open space. Look at this. Psalm 4, first verse. David prays, "When I was in distress, you set me at large." The word for distress is tsar. The word for set me at large is rachavta, from the root rachav. Literally, when I was pressed, you gave me wideness. Psalm 18:19. David again, he brought me out into a broad place, merhav, the place of space. Psalm 118:5. And this is the most striking. From the tight place I cried out to the Lord. The Lord answered me in a broad place. The word for tight place is metzar, same root as tsar. The word for broad place is merhav. Do you see the structure? In the Hebrew mind, anguish is geographic. Suffering is a tight place where you are locked in. And God's salvation is also geographic. It is a broad place where you can breathe, where your chest expands. The Christian who reads Matthew 7:14 with modern Greek eyes only sees geometry, narrow path. You have to squeeze in and endure. But the Christian who reads with Hebrew eyes sees a movement, a sequence, a complete arc. The tsar path leads eventually to the merhav. Tightness is the entrance. Wideness is the goal. And that is good news. Because Jesus is not telling you, discipleship is entering a dark tunnel and suffering for the rest of your life. He is telling you, there is a path that presses at first, yes, but it leads you to the open space, to the merhav of God. And what does Jesus say at the end of the verse? That it leads to life, zoe in Greek, wide life, life that expands, life that is merhav. It is exactly the same theology that King David already knew 1,000 years earlier, but there is a verse that almost no one notices, and which seals this interpretation with divine blood, Isaiah 63:9. The prophet is speaking of the people of Israel in the desert, describing 40 years of trials, hunger, thirst, murmurings, 40 years walking the tsar path, and then he writes a phrase that, translated literally from the Hebrew, is staggering. It says this, "In all their distress, he was distressed." The word for distress, both times, is tsar, their distress, and his distress. Who is Isaiah talking about? About God. When the people walked the tsar path, God himself was tsar with them. God himself felt pressed. God himself compressed himself with his people. This is not creative interpretation. It is in the Hebrew Masoretic text, black on white. Take this, connect it with Matthew 7:14, and look what happens. The pressed path is not a road where you advance alone, pressed, suffering, while God watches you from a comfortable throne in heaven. It is a path where God himself presses himself next to you, where he chooses to be tsar with you. Does that image sound familiar to you? It is exactly what happened in the incarnation. the one whom the entire universe cannot contain, says an ancient commentary in the Catena Aurea, attributed to the tradition of Chrysostom, enclosed himself within the limits of a virgin's womb. The one whose glory fills the heavens became a baby in a manger. The one whose breadth is infinite chose to become tsar. And notice the twist that few theologians articulate this way. When Jesus walks toward the cross, he is walking the most extreme tsar path possible. The one who was infinite presses himself until death. The one who was breadth becomes total tightness. That is why, when he says enter through the narrow gate, he is not asking you for something he himself has not done first. He was the first to pass through there. He pressed his infinite glory into a human body. He entered the tightness of the virginal womb. He locked himself in the most tsar place in the universe, a sealed tomb. And from that tomb he came out into the broadest merhav in history, the resurrection. That is the pressed entrance Christ, the person, not the gate. But wait, let's go one level deeper, because there is a detail that takes all this to another dimension. And it has to do with John 10:9. Jesus says, I am the door. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will go in and out and find pasture. Popular Spanish versions translate that phrase as door. But in Greek, the word John uses is not the same one Matthew uses in 7:13. Matthew uses pile, monumental gate. John uses thera, house door, sheepfold door. And here comes a fact that changes the image. In the Palestine of the 1st century, the rural sheepfolds, where the shepherd would shut up his sheep at night, did not have wooden doors. They were stone enclosures with a single opening. And do you know who was the door? The shepherd himself, literally. He would lie down across the entrance. His body was the closure. If a sheep wanted to leave, it had to step over him. If a wolf wanted to enter, it had to face him first. When Jesus said, I am the door, his hearers saw that. They saw the shepherd lying in the opening of the sheepfold, body extended, vulnerable, the only access. Now go back to Matthew 7. The pressed entrance is Christ. The compressed path is Christ. The one who entered the tightness of the incarnation, the one who carried the press of the cross, the one who passed through death and rose to the infinite merhav, that same one is the gate. It is not difficult because God arbitrarily made it difficult. It is narrow because it has the exact shape of a person crucified with arms wide open. You pass through there, or you don't pass. There are no detours. There are no alternatives. There is no merhav available without first having passed through the body of the shepherd. Now, a fact that almost no one connects, but which confirms everything. In the 1st century, while Matthew was writing his gospel, another Jewish author was also writing in Greek. His book is called today 4th Esdras, and in chapter 7 he wrote this. Imagine, said the author, an immense sea, vast, deep, infinitely open, and then imagine the entrance to that sea. It is narrow, like a river, so narrow that barely a man fits. If someone wants to reach the wideness of the sea, said the author, what must he do? He has no choice. He must first pass through the pressed entrance. There is no other way. And then, so there would be no doubt, he added another image, a city built on a plain, full of goods. But the entrance to the city is on a precipice. On the right, there is fire. On the left, there is deep water. And between the fire and the water, there is only one path, so thin that only one person fits at a time. 4th Esdras, chapter 7, verses 6 through 14. Do you realize what this means? While Matthew was writing his gospel, other Jews of the same period were speaking of exactly the same concept. Pressed entrance, wide space, life or death. It was in the theological air of the time. Jesus did not invent the metaphor. He takes it from his tradition. He sharpens it, he concentrates it, and then he identifies himself as it. But the Judaism of the Second Temple already knew the image. And there is still more. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in Cave 1 of Qumran in 1947, contain a text called the Manual of Discipline, document number 1, QS. In columns 3 and 4, that document describes, almost 1,000 years before the Gospel, exactly the same theology. 2 spirits, 2 ways, spirit of light and spirit of darkness, way of the children of righteousness and way of the children of falsehood. One leads to life, the other leads to destruction. And the Didache, a first-century Christian document rediscovered in 1873 by the Greek Orthodox Metropolitan Philotheos Bryennios in a library in Constantinople, opens with a phrase that is practically a quotation from Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 8. It says this: "There are 2 ways, one of life and another of death, and there is a great difference between the 2. That phrase was catechesis. It was what was taught to new converts before baptism. Before getting into the water, before receiving the seal of the Holy Spirit, they first heard this teaching. There are 2 ways. You have to choose. When Jesus spoke of the pressed way in the Sermon on the Mount, his disciples did not hear a new idea. They heard an ancient idea, one they had memorized since they were children in the synagogue, one their rabbis repeated every Shabbat. And so, when he said what he said, they felt like an electric shock, because the idea was familiar, but the conclusion was not. The conclusion was this, that this entrance, the one Judaism had been pointing to for 1,000 years, the one the prophets predicted, the one Solomon sang, the one Daniel saw in vision, had a name, and the name was standing in front of them. Matthew, 4th Esdras, Dead Sea Scrolls, Didache, 4 independent first-century sources, all speaking of the same concept. The metaphor is not a Christian invention, it is the culmination of 1,000 years of Hebrew theology about the choice between life and death. From Deuteronomy 30 to Jesus of Nazareth, the image is being refined, condensed, personalized, until finally Jesus says, "I am that gate." If this touched something inside you, hit the like button on the video. Share with someone who needs to hear it. Few Christians know that the biblical theology of the 2 ways is one of the most ancient and profound of all Scripture. Let's go one more level, because there is something the Greek, again, hides. Matthew 7:14 says, "Few are those who find it." That word "find" in Greek is heuriskontes, verb heurisko. And here modern scholars are divided. Some hold that heurisko implies active search, encounter as the result of effort. Whoever finds the gate is the one who sought it. Others point out that the same verb in Matthew 13:44 describes a man who finds a hidden treasure in a field accidentally, without searching for it. What kind of finding is this? The answer, according to the International Critical Commentary by Davies and Allison, is in the immediate context. And here comes the connection few preachers make. 7 verses before 14, Jesus had already said another thing. In Matthew 7:7 and 8, he had said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds. To the one who knocks, it will be opened." The word for find in Greek is exactly the same that appears in verse 14, heuriskontes. Matthew is doing something deliberate. He is framing verses 13 and 14 with the promise of verse 8. The pressed entrance is not a cosmic roulette where God leaves a few at random. It is an entrance that is found when sought, that is opened when knocked upon, but also it is not found by chance. Few find it because few seek it, few knock, few are willing to enter the pressed path. Most choose the wide way because it demands no search, it demands no knocking, it demands no asking. It just flows, it carries you, it drags you. The wide way is the current of the world. You don't need to row, you only have to float. But the pressed entrance demands that you decide to stop, to turn around, to seek, to knock, to ask. And that, according to Jesus, few do, not because they are wicked, but because they are distracted, asleep. The current is too pleasant. Stopping requires more effort than letting yourself be carried. As soon as Jesus finishes speaking of the pressed entrance, in verse 15, he says something that seems like another topic. He says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." At first glance, it seems like a change of subject. It is not. It is the same idea, taken one step deeper. If the wide way is full, someone has to be guiding it. Someone has to be telling the multitudes that this is the right way. Someone has to be deceiving the flocks, whispering to them that the pressed entrance does not exist, that the comfortable gate is the real one, that the real God blesses abundance and rejects pressure. Those are the false prophets. The Greek word is pseudo-prophetai, prophets who speak lies in God's name, who decorate the wide way with verses, who monetize salvation, who promise wideness without tightness, merhav without tsar, resurrection without cross. And they come disguised, in sheep's clothing, speaking the language of the flock, quoting the same verses the true shepherds quote, but inwardly, says Jesus with a cutting word, they are lycos, wolves, predatory animals. And verse 16 gives the criterion for recognizing them. By their fruits you will know them, not by their numbers, not by their eloquence, not by their signs, not by their offerings, by their fruits. Do they lead people to the pressed path, or do they anesthetize them so they don't feel it? Do they preach a crucified Christ or a comfortable Christ? Do they demand real repentance, or do they sell instant blessing? Those questions distinguish the true from the false. They are the detector that Jesus gave us. And there is still more. Move forward to verse 21. Just 6 after the pressed entrance, Jesus says one of the most chilling phrases he ever said. A phrase that has taken the sleep from theologians for 2,000 years. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father, who is in heaven. Read it again. This means that there will be people who call Jesus Lord, people who pray to Jesus, people who sing to Jesus, people who preach Jesus, people who prophesy in his name, people who cast out demons in his name, who even so do not enter. How is that possible? And he explains it in the next verse. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not do many wonderful works in your name?" And then I will declare to them, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." This is not fiction. It is in Matthew 7, immediately after. The connection is chilling. The wide way is not only obvious sin. It is not only notorious immorality. It can also be disguised as Christian service. It can have the form of a pulpit, of a stage, of a ministry, of spectacular works done in the name of Christ, but without Christ. That is why he says, "I never knew you." The Greek word is ginosko. It does not mean simply to know facts about someone. It means to know intimately, in relationship. Those people did many things in his name, but they never knew him. They never crossed the pressed entrance of real surrender. They only used his name as a talisman, as a registered trademark, as a marketable product. And that is what separates the disguised wide way from the true pressed way. If this made you a little uncomfortable, that's all right. It has to make you uncomfortable. It is Matthew 7. It wasn't polemical Paul. It was meek Jesus. And he said it with a clarity that allows no escape. Now leave all this and enter a hospital room. Room 412. A woman of 58, diagnosed 3 months ago with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Her name is Marta, but she could be your mother. She could be your neighbor. She could be you in 10 years. Marta was a Christian her whole life. Church on Sundays, tithe, Bible study on Wednesdays. A correct woman, a good woman. When the diagnosis came, the pastors prayed for her. They told her to trust. They told her God would work a miracle. They told her to anoint her head with oil and declare healing. She did. for 3 months. But the disease did not retreat. And one day, sitting in that room, looking at the IV, looking at the light of the machines, Marta had a conversation with God. The first honest conversation of her life. She told him, "For 58 years I walked the wide way, 58 years of comfortable Christianity, of predictable faith, of Jesus as a talisman, of faith that asked for things but never asked for Christ, of faith that avoided suffering as if it were an enemy, of faith that thought health was proof of blessing and illness was spiritual failure. And now," said Marta, "now that the road has closed, now that the walls of the room are pressing me, now that the very air is tsar, now, Lord, now." Then she understood something. She understood that for 58 years she had walked beside the pressed path, but she had never entered it. She had seen it from outside. She had admired it in sermons, but she had never set foot inside. And now, without choosing it, the pressed path had found her. Here comes the strange part. Marta said, to whoever would listen, that those last 4 months of her life, the months in which her body was slowly going out, were the broadest of her existence. That, on the hospital bed, pressed by the disease, she came to know Christ in a way that 58 years of church had never given her. The tsar path led her to the merhav. Marta died on a Tuesday in November, peacefully. Her husband said that in the last days she would smile when she woke up, like someone who has found something, like someone who has arrived. This happens today, in real churches, perhaps in yours, perhaps in mine. The pressed entrance remains open, but few find it. There is another scene, another kind of pressure. Imagine a young man of 19, university, first year, philosophy 401. A brilliant professor, a convincing professor. The professor spends the semester dismantling Christianity, argument by argument, verse by verse, inconsistencies, apparent contradictions, science against Genesis, the problem of evil, suffering, biblical genocides, slavery, misogyny. The young man had grown up in a church. He went with his parents every Sunday, but he had never thought about any of that. He had never read the Bible with real questions. Suddenly, in less than 4 months, everything he believed is shaking. His Christian friends at the university tell him, "Don't listen to the professor, don't read that, don't be deceived." But the young man knows that this answer is not an answer. He knows that dodging the question does not resolve the question. So he does something strange. He starts reading, not just the professor. He starts reading the critics, but also the apologists. He starts studying ancient manuscripts, learning a little Greek, a little Hebrew. He starts seeking seriously, and that wrecks his brain, because there are days when he thinks everything is real, and there are days when he thinks everything is a lie. There are nights when he cries, when he doubts, when he almost gives up. That is tsar, that is a path that presses. But the young man keeps going, because he chose, at some point, not to walk the wide way of simply abandoning the faith without looking at it. And he also did not choose the wide way of believing without thinking. He chose the path that hurts, the one that is sought, the one that is knocked upon. 3 years later, that young man is one of the most solid Christians you know. His faith is no longer the faith of his parents. It is his own, forged in pressure, tested in fire, compressed until becoming a diamond. That is what Jesus was saying. The pressed entrance is not only the one of initial conversion, it is the one of every decision where you choose the uncomfortable truth over the comfortable lie. Every time you choose not to lie, even though lying is easier. Every time you choose to forgive, even though holding a grudge is more natural. Every time you doubt honestly and keep seeking. And every one of those times there is a merhav waiting on the other side. And there is a third scene, one you probably know, one that happens every Christmas, every Easter, every time a family gathers. Imagine a dining room table. It is Friday night, family dinner. At that table there are 3 generations. The grandmother, 82 years old, Christian her whole life, Pentecostal, water baptism at 14. The mother, 54 years old, Christian too, but more relaxed. And the granddaughter, 22 years old, just back from the university. The granddaughter says something during dinner that she has been thinking, that she is not sure she believes in many things, that she has questions, that her grandmother's simple faith no longer works for her, that she needs something bigger, something more complex, something that can hold up against the real questions the world asks her. The grandmother gets angry. She tells her she is losing the faith. She tells her the devil attacked her at the university. She tells her to return to her first love. She tells her that doubt is sin. The mother stays quiet. She looks at her plate. She doesn't want conflict. And the granddaughter, frustrated, leaves the table. Who is on the wide way? Who is on the pressed path? The answer is not obvious. That is why Jesus put this principle in the sermon. The wide way could be the grandmother's. If she has confused inherited faith with a real relationship with Christ. It could be the mother's, if she is staying silent so as not to lose family peace while avoiding thinking deeply. It could be the granddaughter's, if her search ends in comfortable cynicism, if she abandons the search as soon as the questions get hard. But also, the pressed path could be any of the 3. The pressed path for the grandmother would be returning to her Bible with humility, recognizing that her faith needs to deepen, not only be defended, accepting that her granddaughter is not an enemy, but a person in process. The pressed path for the mother would be breaking her silence, entering the conversation, saying what she believes, even though it costs her. The pressed path for the granddaughter would be continuing to search with honesty, not abandoning the table, not abandoning Christ, but battling with the questions until the faith forged in pressure replaces the inherited faith that broke. 3 women, 3 decisions, 3 paths, and Jesus, symbolically seated at that table, looks at the 3 and says, "Few are those who find it, but the gate remains open for the 3, and for you too." If this teaching touched something inside you, hit the like button on the video and share it with someone in your family. What you are learning here, almost no one teaches. Maybe you are the grandmother, maybe you are the mother, maybe you are the granddaughter. Maybe you are someone who is at her own table, in her own moment, facing her own decision. What the Bible tells you today is this: the gate is narrow, the road presses, few find it, but the one who finds it finds the wide life. Let's return to the temple, because there is an architectural detail that ties everything together. In Jerusalem in the 1st century, the temple was not a single building. It was a gigantic complex, concentric layers, each layer with less space, more tightness. If you had to fly over Jerusalem in the year 30 of our era, what you would see from above would be this: an enormous quadrilateral, almost 500 meters from north to south, 300 from east to west. The esplanade of Herod's temple was the largest religious complex in the ancient world of its time. Inside, in concentric circles, the courts. Let's start from the outside. Court of the Gentiles, immense, anyone could enter. Romans, Greeks, Syrians, any non-Jew could set foot on that ground. Wideness was absolute. There, according to the Gospels, Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers. There, the animals for sacrifice were sold like in a market. There, the pilgrims exchanged Roman currency for temple shekels. It was loud, it was chaotic, it was wide. But at the end of the court, there was a wall, a low wall of stone. And in the wall, there were inscriptions in Greek and Latin. They said, "No foreigner may enter beyond. Penalty of death." One of those inscriptions was found archaeologically. In 1871, the French explorer Charles Clermont-Ganneau discovered it near the Temple Mount. The piece is in the Archaeological Museum of Istanbul. It is real. It confirms every word of the New Testament about the separation between Jews and Gentiles in the temple. Past that wall, you entered the court of the women. Narrower, only Jews. Men and women could be there. In this court, there were 13 trumpet-shaped chests where the offerings were deposited. Here, according to Mark 12, Jesus observed the widow throwing in 2 cents. Here, according to Luke 2, the prophetess Anna served day and night. Past that, the court of the Israelite men, even narrower, only male Jews. Past that, the court of the priests, only descendants of Aaron. Here was the altar of burnt offering, the blood spilled, the smoke continually rising to heaven. And at the very back of everything, a chamber, small, square, 20 cubits by 20 cubits according to the Mishnah in the tractate Midot chapter 4, which is equivalent to about 9 meters by 9 meters, covered in gold, without windows, without lamps, only illuminated by the divine presence. The Holy of Holies. And here is the fact that destroys every casual understanding of the temple. Only one person in the whole universe could enter the Holy of Holies, the high priest, and only once a year, on the day of Yom Kippur. If the high priest was considered unworthy by God, he could die inside. The warning was real, described in Leviticus 16. Some medieval rabbis would centuries later add legends about cords tied to the ankle, but those late traditions appear neither in the Bible, nor in the Mishnah, nor in Josephus. What does appear in the biblical text is this: no one else could enter under penalty of death. Access to the presence of God was progressively sealed, layer after layer, from outside inward. Wideness became tightness, tightness became impossibility, impossibility ended in an entrance covered by a veil, and then something happened. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51. While Jesus was dying on the cross, the veil of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, as if an invisible hand grabbed it from heaven and split it. Look at the connection that explodes your mind. The veil of the temple was the most pressed gate in the world, 1 person a year, 1 time, under risk of death, and when Jesus died, that gate was opened. For whom? Hebrews 10, 19 and 20 answer. For everyone. We have boldness to enter the Holy of Holies by the blood of Jesus, says the author, by the new and living way which he opened for us through the veil, that is, his flesh. His flesh was the veil. When he was torn, the veil was torn. When he passed through the pressed entrance remained open forever. And now any person, Jew or Gentile, male or female, priest or slave, can enter the Holy of Holies, not by architecture, not by lineage, not by merit, by a person. The pressed entrance has a name, it has a surname, it has a date of birth, it has a date of death, it has a date of resurrection. He is called Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, Son of Mary, Son of David, Son of God. There is a witness from the first Christian century who must enter this story, a man who lived in an era where Christians died for their faith daily, a man who knew perfectly what it meant to walk the Tsar path. His name is John Chrysostom. He lived in the 4th century, Patriarch of Constantinople. Legendary preacher. His surname, Chrysostom, means golden mouth. They named him that because when he preached, the multitudes wept. And Chrysostom wrote a series of homilies on the Gospel of Matthew. Homily 23 is entirely about Matthew 7:13 and 14, about the pressed entrance. There he says something that modern translations soften, but which in the original Greek is staggering. Chrysostom teaches that both the pressed path and the wide way are temporary. Both pass, both end. The difference is not the path, it is the destination. The one who walks the wide way must travel it comfortably, yes, but ends in a place where there is no longer rest, forever. The one who walks the pressed path suffers the pressure, yes, but ends in a place where there is no longer pressure. Forever. And Chrysostom, preaching in Constantinople with the Christian empire consolidating around him, warned his congregation an uncomfortable truth. The multitudes that fill the temples are not automatically the multitudes that enter the kingdom. Fashionable Christianity is not the same as the Christianity of Christ. The pressed gate did not open when Constantine legalized the faith. It remains pressed even when the empire pushes you to enter. 1,700 years later, that warning is more urgent than ever, because today in many countries, being a Christian costs nothing. They don't persecute you, they don't kill you, they don't imprison you. And in that comfort, it is very easy to be confused. It is very easy to believe you are walking the pressed path when in reality you are going, along with everyone else, on the baptized wide way. Chrysostom warned you from the 4th century, and that warning reaches your screen right now, 2,000 years later. There is another, even more ancient witness, and almost no one knows him. His name was Yeshua ben Sirach, a Jewish sage who wrote in Jerusalem around the year 200 before Christ. His book today is called Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus, depending on the tradition. He wrote it in Hebrew. His grandson translated it into Greek a few decades later in Egypt. Why does it matter for us? Because in chapter 15, verses 14 through 17, Ben Sirach wrote this: He himself created the human being in the beginning and left him in the power of his free choice. If you wish, you will keep the commandments. Before each person are life and death, and what he chooses will be given to him. Read it again. This phrase was written 200 years before Jesus was born, in Hebrew, in Jerusalem, and it says exactly the same theology as Matthew 7, life, death, choice. Do you know what archaeologists found in 1964? Fragments of the Hebrew book of Ben Sirach. Where? In Masada, Herod's fortress, the last Jewish stronghold against Rome, dated before the year 73 after Christ. That means that when Jesus ministered in Galilee, this book circulated in Hebrew among Jews. When the rebels resisted Rome at Masada, they carried this book. When Matthew wrote his gospel, this theology was part of the common Jewish air. Jesus drank not only from Deuteronomy and the Psalms, he also drank from Ben Sirach, from the Hebrew sapiential current of his own time. And when he said, enter through the pressed entrance, he was saying, in a new key, what Ben Sirach had said 2 centuries before each person are life and death. What he chooses will be given to him. But Ben Sirach could not point to himself. Jesus could. That is the difference. And that difference split history in two. But the last twist is missing, and this is the strongest. There is an ancient rabbinic text, Song of Songs Rabbah, Jewish commentary on the book of the Song of Songs. In its chapter 5, section 2, it records an incredible tradition. It says that God spoke to Israel, and he said to her with these words, "Open for me an opening as small as the eye of a needle, and I will open for you one so large that chariots can pass through it." Read it again. Open for me an opening as small as the eye of a needle, and I will open for you one through which chariots may pass. Do you know what this means? That in the ancient rabbinic tradition parallel to Jesus, the image of the eye of the needle already existed, but not as an impossible obstacle, as a minimal gesture of the human heart that God multiplies into infinity. You open a microscopic crack, as small as the hole of a needle, and God turns that crack into an avenue, into a highway, into a merhav that receives chariots. That is how small your yes has to be. That is how big God's response is. And suddenly, all of Jesus' words begin to align. The faith the size of a mustard seed moves mountains. Tiny faith that produces gigantic miracles. The parallel is perfect. You take a step. God completes the avenue. You open the crack. God opens the palace. You enter through the pressed gate. God receives you in the infinite merhav. This is what the rabbinic text says. This is what Jesus knew. It was the theology of his people, the air he breathed. That is why when he spoke of the pressed entrance, he was not inventing an asceticism. He was saying what the rabbis already knew, what Psalm 4 already sang, what Isaiah 63 had already written. But he was saying it in a way no rabbi had said before. He was saying it pointing to himself. And that changed the history of the world. There is one more text, and this is the anchor of the Old Testament, Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 8. You are in Jerusalem, year 587 before Christ. The city is besieged by Babylon. The soldiers of Nebuchadnezzar are outside. Famine has already begun inside. Mothers eating their children, according to the lamentations of the same prophet. The situation is desperate, and God sends Jeremiah to speak to King Zedekiah. What does he tell him? Read literally from the Hebrew. And to the people you shall say, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. The Hebrew words are Didache HaChayim and Didache HaMavet, way of life, way of death. That phrase is exactly the same with which the Didache opens in the 1st century. There are two ways. Do you know what this means? That when Jesus spoke of the pressed entrance in Matthew 7, he was citing indirectly Jeremiah. He was standing in a 600-year tradition, taking the voice of the prophet and putting it in his own mouth. And Jeremiah, remember, was not speaking in the abstract. He was speaking with the city burning, with the Babylonians tearing down the walls, with the knife at the throat of his people. The pressed entrance in Jeremiah was literally the gate of the city. To go out and surrender to Babylon, which was what God was asking, or to remain in the illusory fortress that was going to collapse. One option seemed cowardice, the other seemed bravery. But God had reversed the names. The true bravery was the apparent giving up. The true cowardice was the apparent enduring. That is what Jesus also does in Matthew 7. He reverses the names. He redefines the words. He tells you, what you call wideness is eternal tightness. What you call tightness is eternal wideness. And that is why few find it, because few are willing to let God redefine the words for them. Go back to the beginning, because I said at the start that there is a Hebrew word that changes everything, a word that most Christians miss. It is tsar, but it has a twin. You already know it, merhav. And now, after 50 minutes of journey, you can read Matthew 7:13 and 14 in a new way. Narrow is the entrance, tsar, pressed is the path, thlibo, that oppresses, that presses, that leads to life, zoe, wide life, merhav, and few are those who find it. Uriscontes, those who seek, those who knock, those who ask. Tsar leads to merhav, pressure leads to wideness, incarnation leads to resurrection, cross leads to glory, and the entrance is not a building, it is a person crucified with arms extended. It has the exact shape of Christ. Why do few find it? Because few seek it, few knock, few ask, few are willing to be tsar before being merhav. The wide way is full because it demands nothing. It carries you. You can keep loading everything you have and advance without thinking. Your pride, your self-sufficiency, your comfortable version of God, your faith that only asks for things and never asks for Christ. But the pressed entrance demands a surrender, a renunciation, a letting go. Not because God is stingy, but because you only pass to wideness when you stop carrying what binds you to the tightness of the self. We arrive at the last truth. If you read Matthew 7:14 with Greek eyes, you see effort, you see strive, you see work hard, you see struggle. If you read with Hebrew eyes, you see something else. You see a God who already walked that road before you, who became tsar with you in the desert according to Isaiah 63, who enclosed himself in a womb and then in a tomb, who tore the veil, who threw the gate wide open. The entrance is pressed because Christ passed through it first, and in passing through he left the exact shape, the silhouette, The space, the shape of the gate, is the shape of his crucified body. But it is open. It was closed for centuries. Courts, veils, high priests, once a year. But the day Jesus died, all of that ended. Now it is open. And the pressed path now is not a road God coldly imposes on you. It is the road he himself walked. And where you are going to suffer pressure, pressing tribulation, there too, according to Isaiah, he presses himself with you. You never walk the tsar path alone. There is a pressed God at your side. And at the end of the road, there is an infinite merhav. That is what most miss. Not through their fault, through the fault of translations that lose the Hebrew root, through the fault of medieval legends about gates that never existed, through the fault of a church that forgot that the gospel was born in Hebrew, not in corporate Greek, but now you know it. And what you do with this depends only on you. The entrance remains open. The shape of crucified Christ remains marked in the air. The infinite merhav waits. Ask him, seek him, knock. Few do it, but whoever does, finds.